Welcome back to our next Fabric at Scale Together session. In our previous sessions, we covered the basics of Microsoft Fabric, data warehousing, and semantic models. And this session builds off those by providing an introduction to administration and governance in Fabric, providing a foundation for the basics of workspace management, security, and access control. My colleague Juan Llovet joins us to discuss some of the basics of administration and security within Fabric, and includes some hands-on demos to illustrate how this is implemented. So we hope you enjoy today's session. Juan, you all set to go?
Thank you very much, Brian. Can we confirm that you can see my screen?
Yep, we got it.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Great to see you again if you've been following along with us for the last couple of sessions, or great to meet you if you're new today. I am very excited to be here with you today to deliver the last more lecture-based session around admin security and governance. And as Brian mentioned, I definitely also recommend you sign up for the lab, because this will basically bring your knowledge into a hands-on situation where you can actually get to experience Fabric yourself. So I'm excited to dive into the last topic today. I'll give you some interesting demos of the different features we're going to talk about. Really, there's a lot to cover, especially in the governance area with Fabric, a lot of different ways to get insights into your Fabric tenant and your different workspaces and items. So I'm excited to guide you today through the landscape of governance in Fabric, right? So to get started in terms of what we're going to cover, I'll give an overview around these general concepts of governance, security, and admin on Fabric, and then we'll dive into each of the three topics in this order. And then finally, we'll finish up with demo, which I think we'll spend about half of our time in, or maybe a little bit less than half of the allotted time will be demo today. So you can really get to see firsthand how these things work. So to get started, without further ado, I wanted to bring back this slide that you have been seeing week in and week out throughout our presentations, which really shows you the state of data integration in Fabric, and Fabric being your central repository of data for analytics. And you can see here that the one lake is at the center of our image. It is where we stage all our data to work on Fabric. And we can see different ways of importing the data, such as the shortcuts below, which again, as a brief reminder, they are a virtual representation of the data with no need to copy the data over and no need for that duplication. And then we have mirroring on the left-hand side, where you have automated ingestion of your data from different sources. And then on the right-hand side, we have the open access APIs that also enable you to load data from other source systems. So the idea here is that you are unifying your data within Fabric, and you have all these different computes accessing the data that you have brought into Fabric. So you have to be able to correctly manage this data, govern it, and apply security policies on top of it, because we are dealing with a variety of data sources and data that is important for the businesses to keep governed and secure. So today we'll be focusing on how we can integrate all these different sources under a single governance and security model. So to take a brief overview about how this works in Fabric, we have it divided here into a couple different categories. As I mentioned, Fabric is the central place for your data, so you're managing this data state, and you are really gaining this access to creating a logical data mesh. And we'll talk a bit more about how to organize on workspaces, on domains. I think domains is a very important concept in Fabric, and really having insights into the ways you categorize your data in different buckets, depending on, for example, your organizational structure, or if you're working with multiple customers, that is some other way you could segment your data, right? So those are the tools that you have to really control your data and have a very organized Fabric tenant. If then we move on to the secure, protection, and compliance on our second category here, we'll be talking about the inbound and outbound network connections, as well as granting people access to data within Fabric itself. And finally, we'll cover a bit more around Fabric and compliance with industry requirements and industry certifications. Our third bucket is more around, again, powering this data mesh of having your data organized in a correct way, but not only to keep control over your data, but also to allow your users to access the most relevant data in an easier way. Again, we'll show you the one-lake catalog that plays a big role here, but I'll also show you the different labels and the way that you have to basically endorse content that is deemed ready for user consumption. So this is a very important feature set to enable users to discover data that they might not be aware that is there ready for their use. And finally, we'll also talk about monitoring and covering insights and acting on these insights within your capacity, within your tenant, and within your workspaces. So all the different tools embedded within Fabric and the interaction with Purview that allows you to gain insights into what is happening on your Fabric tenant and what you should do about it. Talking about the Purview integration, this is a diagram that I think really covers today's topic. If you're going to remember one thing or if you have to use one slide as a resource, I think this one is very helpful. It buckets it out into the different management scenarios that I mentioned previously, and it highlights the different features that you have within Fabric as well as the connection with Purview. So you see on the right-hand side, we have Purview, which is Microsoft Purview. It's a standalone product. And the way it interacts with Fabric is by extracting metadata from Fabric, and we'll talk a bit more about certain things you can do with Purview and how this works more in depth. And then with that metadata, you are able to process it inside of Purview, obtain these different insights, and then apply governance and security policies directly back to Fabric. So that's why we have this bidirectional connection with Fabric. If you see here some of these features, for example, in Secure, Protect, and Comply, we see Purview sensitivity labeling or data loss prevention policies. You see that these do require Purview. So while you enable this within Fabric, you do also need Purview for these two categories, for example. So really, it's this deep interaction between the two products that allows you to have an overall view of your data state and to be able to govern correctly your Fabric tenant and your other data sources with Purview as well. So knowing a bit more about the general status of Fabric governance and security, let's dive a bit more into the admin side of things. The admin side of things is really where we're going to cover how you set up Fabric for your users to be able to work inside of Fabric. So in terms of some tools that you will be leveraging as a Fabric admin, the admin portal is the first one that you can resort for most settings in the Fabric portal. And really, it's going to be your central space to configure Fabric. And you'll see that if you are a tenant admin, you will have many more options than if you are not. On the left-hand side of the screen, I know it's a very small screenshot, but I'll show you during the demo what this looks like from an admin point of view. But really, applying settings throughout Fabric, creating domains, assigning capacities, assigning other users to be admins of given capacities and domains. So it's covering all of Fabric as a single tenant. If you want to be a bit more fine-grained, you can move into workspace settings. And the difference here is that within the admin portal, you're able to monitor who creates workspaces, what workspaces, where do they create them, and assigning people to workspaces as well to really categorize who is working on what and how this is all managed from this central location, right? Then you can also dive deeper within the workspaces themselves, and I'll give you an example during the demo about what settings apply to a specific workspace. So I like to think about the workspace segmentation as the main way that you're going to be distributing content, users, and workloads throughout Fabric is by categorizing them on workspaces. So it gives you a bit more granularity if you're applying individual settings to each workspace. And then finally, you can connect to external tools using the Fabric APIs, and you can extract information such as item name, domain ID, lineage, and more that you can process with your own custom logic to make your own decisions based on what exists and what changes day to day in your Fabric tenant. So here we go. I got a bit ahead of myself in terms of the segmenting with the workspaces, but this is the idea that I was telling you about, having each item right into its corresponding workspace depending on the user, the workflow, the specific business unit as well. But a way to group workspaces together is through the capacities. And the concept of the capacities, as we've explained throughout the presentations for FAST, is the unified billing for Fabric. You have these capacities that you configure on the Azure portal to your specified SKU size, and you're billed by them. And then this compute is spread across all the different Fabric workloads that you are using. So another way to segment workloads and to segment business units is by giving them their own capacities. This is going to allow you to segment this billing to make sure what is using what in terms of the capacity and who is getting billed for the Fabric usage. So a capacity holds multiple workspaces, right? And a workspace is present in a single capacity. So it's a bigger umbrella, right? There's workspaces within capacities. And we'll talk about the capacity. Well, actually, we have it in the next slide. So this is perfect. It rolls into this. To getting insights into your capacity, at the very center of the slide is the capacity metrics app that was also represented in the other screenshot. The idea is to further analyze what consumption is going on in your capacity behind the scenes and what workloads are consuming the most compute. Is your capacity size to the correct size? Do you need to scale it up, scale it down, depending on what you see here on the capacity metrics app? So I think this is a very important one, especially if you are a billing admin of some sort or a provisioning admin that is really focused on who is using Fabric and how much are we spending. That would be the central place that you would leverage for those decisions and those insights. On the left-hand side, we have the admin monitoring, which is going to give you more insights across governance in your whole tenant. And it has a series of reports that you can access. And I'll show you this more in depth in the demo, but really very useful data to have an overview of what is going on in your tenant and who is doing what and how the items are being categorized and are we being compliant with the way we're structuring our data. And then we'll have the Purview Hub on the right-hand side. Is similar concept here, but really focused on all the data across Fabric and on really understanding these different items and the endorsements, for example. We'll have two more tools here. The Monitoring Hub, the difference is that if you think about the admin monitoring and about Purview, you're looking at your data. If you think about the capacity metrics, you're looking at your consumption of Fabric capacity and your billing. Your Monitoring Hub is the place that you come to check that the jobs you are running on time and are running without errors. So really the idea behind here is to ensure that your workloads are functioning correctly with no issues. So you don't have billing information here, you don't have governance information, you get more in-depth insights into what has run, when has it run, and what is the result. Did it fail or did it succeed, right? So that is the central place if you're managing the actual workloads that are running. Workspace monitoring is like a next level evolution of monitoring. It's for a specific workspace, and what it does, and I'll show you an example, it sets up a custom query language database where every single change in your workspace is being ingested in real time into the database, and you can query it using KQL. You can create your own custom reports, create your own custom queries. And this really, if you have a workspace that you're interested in knowing up to the nearest second or a couple seconds, right? And it's real time here, what is going on and what is changing and who is doing what, then the workspace monitoring gives you an extra flexibility that you have here to get insights into the actions that are happening within your own workspace. And you will be leveraging these Fabric tools, like I mentioned, the event stream and the KQL database to power this monitoring. So that's a bit more custom solution for you to monitor. And this is workspace by workspace. So you have to enable it at that level. And let's move on to security. And let's talk about network security right now. If we talk about inbound security, this is how are users accessing your Fabric tenant? How do we make sure they are accessing it in a secure way? We have the private link, which enables connections directly into Fabric from the Microsoft backbone without needing to go through the public internet. So if you set that up within your network connected to Fabric through the Microsoft backbone, you are enabling your users to connect directly without going through the private internet. And then we'll explore it more in depth in the next slide, but we also have Entra conditional ID set up for Fabric. When we talk about service tags, this is a feature of Azure where you are able to group IPs together to make changes to them without having to manage every single IP address in terms of the whitelisting for Fabric to be able to access Fabric. So this is a feature that you can also leverage for Fabric. And then when we talk about Fabric outbound security, this is the idea of Fabric accessing your data that is outside of Fabric, right? In terms of outbound security, you can have VNets where if you have some resources on Azure that you want to access directly within Fabric without having to go to the public internet, you can set up a VNet gateway to that specific VNet in Azure. And you also have workspace trusted identities where you're basically granting an Entra identity to your workspace, and then it's going to Azure to access data and bring it into OneLake. And here in the outbound security, we also have the on-premises gateways. If you have any data on-premises and you want to pull that from Fabric, you can use an on-prem gateway to extract that information through a pipeline, for example, right? Let's dive a bit deeper into a couple of these features. We're talking about the conditional access, and this is, again, additional purchase required because it is an Entra ID feature, but it's the idea of making sure that your users are accessing Fabric under a set of conditions, such as, for example, do they have MFA enabled? Do they have a managed device? Are they within a geographical location where we're granting them access to this data? So when you have a lot of data on Fabric and users accessing through it, you can leverage this Entra ID feature for even more control over when and what is being accessed. Then we have workspace and item security, which I will be covering in the demo. You can grant access to users to anything within a workspace or to specific items. So it really depends on that granularity that you have when choosing who has access to what. Compute security, another level of granularity in this case, where if you're using, for example, the SQL endpoint, you can set up specific rules as to which users have access to what data. This universal security model that we said coming soon here, but it was an announcement in Fabric where we now have it in limited preview. I'll make sure to put a link in the chat. That'll be the very last thing we'll have in the demo. I won't be able to demo the whole thing because it's limited and you have to sign up through a form, but I'll give you a bit of a taste of what you will be able to do with this. And I definitely recommend you, if this is something you're interested on, to signing up to the limited private preview. The idea behind universal security is that you define what access users have to your data at table, at column, and at row levels within the OneLake itself. And regardless of what engine they're using to access the data, those permissions are going to flow through to them. Of, hey, if there's this specific column within this database that you are not able to access because it is sensitive data, and regardless whether you're trying to access it through SQL or through Power BI or through Data Activator, you won't have access to that column of sensitive data. Then we have the information protection labels that I will show you as well. Well, you can self-label your artifacts or your items depending on what they are. Are they public data? Are they highly confidential data that shouldn't be disclosed? And this is to always give people guidance in terms of what they should be able to do. Can I send this to a customer? Can I post this in a blog, right? By having these labels and this consistency of the labels on your data, you'll be able to make sure that your users understand what they can do. And as well, you can also apply policies within Purview that depend on the label. For example, if this is highly confidential, this data cannot be downloaded. That is an example of a policy that you could set, right? So leveraging those labels that you can configure. And then finally, encryption. All the Fabric data is encrypted at rest and in transit, so you can rest assured that your data is being encrypted and is being protected throughout your workflows, right? And then let's cover a couple things around compliance with industry requirements. Fabric has a set of certifications, as you can see here: GDPR, UDB, HIPAA, ISO, more and more certifications that enable you to use Fabric as a product for sensitive applications, such as in healthcare. The data residency, you also have control over where your data is being stored over 54 data centers worldwide. You can do this through your home region and through your different capacities. So if you have data residency bounds for different customers or different situations, as you can see there, you can store different workspaces in different data centers of your choosing based on where you deploy your capacity within Azure. And then you have this tight integration with the Purview audit, which basically automatically logs every user activity from Microsoft Fabric to enable you in case you need to run an investigation on what happened. Was there some data exfiltration? What led to this point? The Purview audit is directly connected to Fabric and it stores all user activities that happen within Fabric and what specific item was modified, how was it modified, what queries were run, right? So things like that that give you a 360 view of trail crumbs of what's been happening in your tenant if you need to access those. Talking more about governance, these are also some tools that I will show you on the Fabric portal. The One Lake catalog is the central place for data discovery for any Fabric user, where you can find and explore and use the data items that have been assigned to you and that have been certified and promoted by a tenant admin. That is giving you the peace of mind that this is production-ready data and trustable insights. And this is part of the endorsements, right? Creating these curated sources of truths that you can discover as a user. Data lineage and impact analysis is, in my opinion, a very helpful feature of Fabric that allows you to see how changes propagate throughout your different Fabric items. What item depends on what other items upstream, right? So if you have a lakehouse where you're loading all your data from a source system, and then you're having a notebook modifying it, and then you're having a semantic model, and then finally a report, that is a chain, right, of dependencies across the data, as you can see here in this kind of a tree structure, to really know where your data is coming from and what can you expect to change downstream if you update data in a certain item. So it really gives you a good overview of what you are doing in the general context of your data structure in Fabric. When talking about Purview, there's three main areas that you can accomplish through Purview, and this apply to Fabric through the integration. The first one is data security, more focused on information and cybersecurity teams around setting up these policies. And as I mentioned with the audit, having that ability to trace back events in an investigation after a breach or any security incident, you're able to do that. Data governance for consumers, engineers, and data officers. Really, as I mentioned before, labeling your data, ensuring that the correct permissions are granted, ensuring that people have access to reliable data and that they don't have two different sources of the truth, right? We want a single source of the truth with quality data. So that's what you will achieve with Purview. And you can get insights into your data quality state, and you can get insights again into the lineage and the dependencies between the data. Gives you a really good overview of your whole data state on Microsoft. And then finally, with risk and compliance, that is more around setting these policies of what can be shared, when can it be shared, who can it be shared with, depending on what data is present, to make sure that you are centrally managing these policies to basically prevent yourself from being exposed to unnecessary risk. So these are the three main things that you can accomplish with Purview and that flow over to Fabric through the connection. These are a couple of examples here. The data loss prevention policies, as I mentioned, is choosing what data can be shared. And for example, sensitive information, if you automatically detect it, you can prevent it from being shared, and you can have other automatic risk remediation actions that can be triggered. And as I mentioned again, labeling your data in Fabric is something very important, and I will show you a report that tells you how much of your data is labeled in Fabric and how you can work towards that goal of basically having your whole data state labeled, which is it's a hard lift, right? It's not an easy project to undertake, but it's very important to have these classifications in your data, and there's the necessary tools in Fabric to assist you and to create this culture of labeled data that everyone is aware of. This is more of the specifics of how you can get insights into your data with Purview. We can start with the data catalog, going across your entire data state, including Fabric and other Azure data services and other connections that we also have present from Purview to third-party services as well. And in this case, classifying between business domains and data products to make it discoverable for users to understand where the data is and for you to have an overview of what people are working on. Data discovery is, as I just mentioned, is a next step of being able to find the data you need based on the data catalog. Data management is having that control over the access to the specific data sets you're creating and double checking that data quality, which brings you a bit more into the data estate health, right? That allows you to set those goals, as I was mentioning, of what changes need to be made to ensure that you have a great data state that is governed, is secured, and is ready for user consumption. So these are all Purview features that you have access to when you purchase Purview. And as I mentioned, as you can see through the slide, tightly interconnected with Fabric, you bring all this metadata into Purview and you're able to manage it from this central location. So with that being said, that's the content that we have for today in terms of the presentation, and I will jump into some demo that will give us a bit more of a real life use case of these different features. All right. Can you see my screen, the Fabric screen here?
Yep, we've got it.
Perfect. So we are in one of our workspaces. This is actually the workspace I used to demo our data warehouse capabilities. And we can see we have some items. We have a notebook, a lakehouse, a pipeline, and a couple of warehouses here. So now that we are in the workspace, the first thing I want to show you is how to grant this workspace permissions to different users. And this is right here, front and center in the Manage Access button at the top right of your screen. And you can browse for users. For example, I have a test user here that I would like to grant access to. If I click on Add Users, and I can have my test user here, for example, and I can grant them access as a viewer, a member, a contributor, or an admin. The admin basically has control through all of the workspace. The member doesn't have access to who is a different participant in the workspace, but they have access to all the other features. The contributor has a set of more limited access to modifying items, and the viewer can just come and take a look at the data. And this view more, this documentation page right here is very helpful. And I would recommend you leverage it when choosing who to grant access to, because you have very specific information here about what each of the roles can do. So really depending on what you're trying to have someone to do, you can apply here the principle of the least privilege, right? And grant them only what is needed for their work. And again, as a reminder, this grants them access to all these items. So if right now this user is able to see all the different items that you have in this workspace. What if we want to be a bit more granular in terms of who we are granting access to what specific items? Let's take a look at this trip analysis warehouse, for example. And we are opening this warehouse. Here we go. Well, let's go back because it's loading the warehouse. We can also do it through this setting here. We can go to these settings and we can go to the, I'm in the wrong space here. Yeah. Here you go, manage permissions, exactly. It's a different setting and you can access which users have access or permissions to this specific warehouse. And you can see we're even getting more granular here. We're not having admins, contributors, readers, right? We are seeing who can read data with SQL, who can read the OneLake data, monitor the queries, audit the queries. For example, you have someone who is a database admin who is not here to work with the data, but to really upkeep the database itself and see what queries are being run. You can have them here. If we only have an analyst that is going to be working solely with Power BI, you can allow them to build reports in the full semantic model. So for each different item, you're going to have a different set of permissions that you can grant on an item by item basis. So again, we have this logical separation of workspaces, and if you have a team working in a workspace, the whole team, and they need access to every single data item, you can have them all set up with those permissions. But if you want to have a more granular control and just give people just-in-time access to, say, a warehouse, a lakehouse, or a semantic model, you can do this on an item-by-item basis. Let's see. Let's talk about labels, and we can take a look at this lakehouse, for example, and we'll go into this setting pane. And here is the control that we have over the label. And you can see at this moment, we don't have a label set, but this is a sample lakehouse, is sample data. I use it to give demos. Let's just give it a sensitivity level of public. This data that can be shared with external people on a as needed basis, right? It doesn't contain any specific information that is proprietary. If we wanted to protect it in this way, we could go into general, which is business data that should not really be shared. Confidential data is protected, highly confidential data shouldn't be shared with anyone unless they really need access to it. If you can see the difference here, we can see unrestricted or all employees. So basically, when you set the sensitivity labels that come with a policy, you are restricting the access. This data, once I set it like confidential all employees, it is not going to be able to share. And if you see this message, you can see that this sensitivity label applies downstream. Let's take a quick look at the lineage view, and you'll see how that applies. So we've added this to the lakehouse, right? And you will see the sensitivity label update. We can see it has stayed here. If we take a look at the semantic model, and we take a look at the sensitivity label, if I can see it. Okay, let's take a look at the lineage view where we'll be able to see that, because I can't find the menu right now. But if you look here in your workspace, you can have two views at the very top. You have the list view that just gives you a list of all the different items, and you have the lineage view where you can see them on this structure as a tree. And this is what I wanted to show you, is that we've enabled the sensitivity label on the lakehouse, and it's flowing downstream onto the SQL analytic endpoint. We have the same sensitivity label and same thing for the semantic model. So really, if we determine this data to be confidential, all the data from it should also be considered confidential. However, if we have, say, these two different items here, and we have some transformation in this notebook that we consider confidential, we can go ahead and just make this notebook confidential, but the data that is upstream of it won't be affected by this change in the sensitivity label that we have created. And again, this is the view of this lineage. And we have a pretty simple workspace here, but you can imagine something where you have the source data, such as a SQL database on Azure or on premises, coming onto a warehouse, coming onto a notebook, to a semantic model, to a report, to a dashboard, right? So you can imagine how this has multiple stages, and you can always trace back to see where your data is coming from, or if you're the owner of the upstream data set, trace down to see how these changes are going to propagate with what you are updating on your data item. So this is this. Let's start looking a bit more into the specific hubs that you have for monitoring and for insights. And let's begin with the monitoring hub. As a reminder, this is the hub that you use to double check what has been running and has it run correctly or not. And you can run some filters here. In this case, I'm interested on notebooks. You could also look into the status. Do I want notebooks that succeeded, that failed? So let's take a look into one of these notebooks that I've run most recently. And if we open this specific run of the notebook. It's going to take a little bit because it has a lot of information that you have over here. You can have some run details on the right-hand side of the screen. We see that this session has timed out, and you can take a look more at the resources that it has been using throughout time, how it has been allocated certain vCores out of the maximum vCores it has available, and it's been having some peaks of when I've been running it versus when I've just been having it idle. But if you really look at the jobs here, you can click on the job and we can go one more level in depth, and we'll do a quick login here into the specific Spark run log. And if you are very familiar with Spark and you work on it every day, and you'll be used to monitoring using the specific Spark logs. So really you can go all the way to the source of what has been happening with your notebook. And this is the monitoring hub where you have everything that has been running lately, as opposed to having to go into each notebook. Okay, when did this last run? How can we obtain this information, right? So and bird's eye view of everything that is running in your Fabric workspace currently. Let's take a look now at the metrics app, which is what we use more for managing our different capacities and how they are consumed. So if you see here, we have a Fabric and Power BI menu. The Capacity Metrics app is a Power BI app, so we can just quickly switch over to Power BI, and we will see this apps menu coming on our left-hand side navigation bar, and we can access this app, and we see I already have it installed, but you can go up here to right-hand side, you can get apps, and you can, well, I have it here, the first one. If it's not showing up the first one for you, you can just go in Fabric Capacity, right? And you have a couple ones here, but this is the one we're using, the capacity admins monitoring, right? So let's take a look at what the app actually is. And this is the first app I'm showing you. I will show you the other monitoring hub items. You have to think of this as an automatic Power BI semantic model that is being refreshed periodically with Fabric data, and an automatic report as well that is generated for you. So behind the scenes is leveraging Power BI, and you'll see a lot of these visualizations are very familiar to you if you're a Power BI user. In some cases, such as the Capacity Metrics app, you can develop your own custom reports, but that's not always the case. For example, in admin monitoring, you have a bit more limitations. But just to remember of how this is working behind the scenes. So once we access the Capacity Metrics app, you will see that you have compute, storage, and auto-scale compute for Spark. We'll focus on compute and storage today. Auto-scale compute for Spark is the ability of having your Spark utilization built independently to your Fabric capacity. So if you're interested in that, that's a whole other thing that you have to manage and monitor as well. So if we take a look at this Power BI report, again, very familiar if you're a Power BI user, you can see the multimetric ribbon chart of the different days that this has been used. Apparently haven't used this capacity since Friday, May 2nd, so we can only see that day, but you will see it flowing through the different days with your usage. And here you can see the percentage utilization over time. And you can see I have a huge spike here where I've been allowed to overuse my capacity, but then it has been throttled behind the scenes. So with more regular usage, you will see something more useful here, and you will see these lines, which are basically your capacity limits before you start to see some throttling. And that's something else that you can look at through the throttling menu as well with this visualization. And you can see how here we've had 10-minute interactive throttling go up to 2000% because we really went above this capacity, so we were prevented from doing anything else with it. So this really gives you an idea, and this shouldn't be happening. I've been using a very small capacity for certain demos, and this has just gone up, but with a bigger capacity and more regular use, you should see some more normal patterns here that will enable you to decide whether to scale it up or scale it down. We have some specific item information here. We can see that this is the notebook that has given me the most problems, using a lot of capacity unit seconds, right? And you can see how many users have been leveraging it and what type of billing, how many jobs has it rejected as well. So this is really a item by item description of how you're consuming your capacity. You also have access to your storage here, where it's going to tell you a bit more of how much data you currently have available in OneLake and what you're being billed for. The difference between storage, current storage and billable storage depends on if you have any soft deletes. For example, I'm being billed for 0.01 gigabytes more because of something that I deleted that hasn't fully deleted. It has just been a soft delete. But you could also be billing less for certain compression, or if you have mirroring, those are free copies of data with mirroring, right? So you might see slightly more, slightly less storage billed and storage used. And the one thing I'd like to mention here for this capacity metrics app and for the other Power BI based monitoring tools that I'll show you is that you have access to Power BI Copilot, right? So we can ask, for example, what item is consuming most storage? And we'll see Power BI Copilot analyze the report and the underlying semantic model to get us an answer. So as I mentioned before, the familiarity of Power BI and these tools, such as Copilot, also apply to these admin use cases. So you can leverage it to your best use case, right? To really work easier with this data. You have the filters pane as well available here. And we see here the tenant analytics with OneLake storage is 0.04 gigabytes. It's right away this workspace. So this is a very easy answer. I think this is, it's talking about the current storage versus the billable storage. But if you have more complex queries, you can leverage Power BI Copilot to get insights into how you're using your Fabric capacities. So let's jump right back into the admin monitoring, and the way you're going to access this is by opening the workspaces. If you're an admin, you will have this admin monitoring tab at the very top, and you can access it here. And again, as I mentioned before, a couple different reports and a couple different Power BI semantic models. I'm very interested in the Preview Hub in this case, and I'll show you what this looks like. Opening up another Power BI report, we can see that we're talking about sensitivity labels. I'm not doing great personally on my tenant, for example, with only 29 or around 30% of sensitivity labels applied. Again, I use this tenant for demos, so it's not like it's a production tenant, but if you're in a production situation, you would want that number to be as close to 100% as possible. And same thing here with domains, placing workspaces in domains. I will show you real quick what a domain looks like and what the OneLake what the OneLake hub looks like as well. You can take a deeper dive into sensitivity labels, into what is labeled, what is not, some overall insights on the left-hand side, and you can take a look at your domains and how this data flows through the different domains. What is not in a domain, what is in a domain, see how I have a fast domain, for example, and you'll see how I have a couple different workspaces here. Well, this tool, as it is Power BI, it is on a refresh cycle of once daily, so you won't see immediate data here through these different reports, but they're a very easy way of getting your information right away and getting a look into what is happening on your Fabric tenant. So talking about the domains and the OneLake catalog, what we can do is come here to have our central place of discovery. I have my domain for fast, for example, for this initiative, and I have a couple other domains for a customer or for hackathons, and I can just self-select into what logical separation of this data that I want. A domain is a classification of different workspaces. You can have a workspace in a single domain, and you can have multiple workspaces in a domain. And these domains can be these workspaces can be in different capacities while they're in the same domain. So it is a way to abstract a bit more this data classification. If you have, for example, your marketing team working on a single domain, but you have sub-teams with each their own capacities, you can merge all these workspaces together into a single domain, which only focuses on the data. It doesn't focus on the billing. So you don't get per domain billing, you get per domain discovery of your data. So in this case, I can take a look, and I have to decide, right? I can't look at everything at the same time. Do I want to look at data, insights, or at processes? In this case, we're looking at data, and I can see across different workspaces what data do I have. If I had anything endorsed, it will show up here as endorsed or promoted, and the sensitivity label is also here up front and very visible, right? So if you're looking for data, or if you want to see what your one lake looks like, this is the place to look at. And let's see, I'll show you very quickly the workspace monitoring event house as well. Let's go over to this event tracking workspace. And well, let me show you beforehand what the creation process is. If I go back to my warehouse workspace, I can go back to the workspace settings, and I will go over to monitoring, this last option here, and I'll just click on create a new event house. And it is unable to create on login one. Something must be happening behind the scenes, probably something capacity related, but the idea is that you click event house and it takes a little bit. Some processing tells you, please do not leave this screen, and it automatically deploys the following Fabric items that I'm going to show you now in my other workspace, this one for event tracking. So it's very easy. It's a click of a button and right away you have access to it. So it has created this monitoring event stream that is ingesting data from Fabric into the monitoring KQL database, which lives within an event house. So if I take a quick look about what specific data I can access here, you'll see I have a variety of tables, and I'm interested. This is an event tracking workspace that I use to track, and as a sample data, where different bicycles from a bicycle sharing company are in a city. So I'm interested to see what are users querying of this real-time database on Custo. So we can see all the different queries here, and we can see what database, what item, right? And let me see if we can see the actual query text. If we open one of these, you can see the user right away. You saw my username, and you can see the query text here in a bit of a different format. But you can really use this to, in real time, take a look at what is happening, and you can develop your own Power BI reports from it, your own KQL query sets with specific transformations. So this basically generates this integration with your monitoring data right away with a click of a button. So the setup is very easy, but then it's up to you to develop the reporting solutions that are going to give you useful insights on what is going on in your specific workspace. So we've done this. Let's see what other two things we can look at. Let's quickly look at the admin portal. Again, if you're an administrator of a whole Fabric tenant, you will have all these options. If you're not, you will solely see capacity settings if you are assigned to a specific capacity. But really, you can do anything from here, all the way from turning on preview features to specifying what connections can users use, or who is assigned to what workspace or what capacity. So you see I have a couple different capacities here, and I can take a look at it here, and I can see contributor permissions that I have specific users assigned for, or admin permissions over this capacity. I have a teammate, for example, who is using this capacity, so I granted him access to it. So really, all the different settings, and you can use the handy search bar here as well. Search, for example, Copilot. Do we have it enabled? Do we have disabled, right? A couple different capacities that can be designated as Fabric Copilot capacities, or some other settings. But really, like, most of your Fabric settings you are going to be able to find here. Now let me show you one last thing that is a little bit of, not a sneak peek because I don't have access to a specific feature, but I'll give you the link to the form to sign up for the feature, but an introduction to what it looks like to have this central security model, which is one of Fabric's biggest innovations, right, and biggest features. When we've talked about the central place for your data, the central place for all your computer engines accessing your data with no duplication, this is a big part of it that is currently being introduced in limited public preview. The idea of setting row level security and column level security at the data level itself, and that propagating into every single compute engine or any downstream item that you might create without the need to specify that, right? So I have a lakehouse. I have some sample data here. And for example, I have employee data. So maybe I don't want every single analyst to have access to this employee table if they're only there to analyze data. So what I can do right now is I can click on Manage One Lake Data Preview, and I can create my own role, and I can edit this role, right? And I can add or take away data from it. So let's go ahead and let's create this sales analyst role, right? And we'll give them access to only selected data from our lakehouse. We can select our tables or our files. In this case, I am going to select tables. And as I mentioned, this is a bit of a sneak peek. Right now, you can grant access to all tables or to all files. But if you apply for this limited public preview that I'm going to give you the link for, you are able to select individual tables. And then when you go in, you're able to select column level security and row level security as well when you define a specific SQL filter rules. So this is it for today. I hope you found it interesting. I'm going to paste the link right away if you are interested in applying for the preview. And again, this is going to be one of the biggest new features that will be developed in Fabric in the coming weeks and months. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this session on security and governance. And again, as Fumbi also pasted in the chat, I really encourage you to sign up for the lab and to put your skills to a hands-on use with us. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our session. Our calls to action for our partners: join our Fabric partner community on Teams. The Fabric engineering team hosts regular calls on technical topics as well as AMAs with our leadership team. And the Teams channel provides a great way for you to participate in ongoing discussion and ask any questions that you might have. And while we hope to see you in one of our hands-on workshops, we also have lots of learning opportunities in our Fabric learning paths, so dozens of hours of content are available to help get you up to speed and keep you updated on the latest enhancements. And finally, if you're interested in hosting your own in-a-day workshops, such as Fabric Analyst in a Day or Real-Time Intelligence in a Day, reach out to us and get started. I'll paste all of these links in the description below. Thanks for watching.